or SMQs. And hello and welcome everybody to this session. My name is Anne Jullenswert and I work as an International Medical Officer for the MedDRA MSSO. This is the role where I and my colleagues look at your change requests and we decide whether to add a new term to MedDRA and where to place it in the hierarchy. Additionally, I'm part of the ICH M1 PTC working group as one of the MedDRA representatives, supporting our Chief Medical Officer, Marina Di Giusti. This webinar is around 2 hours, and we will have plenty of time for exercises, for demonstrations, and for addressing your questions. As Leander has already mentioned, please submit any questions you may have during the webinar through the question panel, which you can find in the GoToWebinar control panel. We will also have a MedDRA browser demonstration, and you can have the browser open and follow if this is your preferred learning style. And the credentials for entering the web-based browsers in this training session can be found in the chat, or Leander will shortly put them. But of course, you can also use your company's MedDRA login details. Before we dive into the topic, I have 2 disclaimer slides, and I would like to share some background related to MedDRA. And many of you might have seen this slide before in last week's training or in any other MedDRA training which you've participated in. The development of MedDRA was adopted by ICH in the mid of the 1990s, and ICH has become the owner of the terminology. The MedDRA Maintenance and Support Service Organization, the MSSO, was put in place by ICH to maintain and further develop and distribute MedDRA on contract. And all MSSO activities are overseen by an ICH MedDRA steering committee. And this committee has members from industry and regulators from the ICH regions and the WHO as an observer. Recently, the previous MedDRA Management Committee was renamed to MedDRA Steering Committee. And as of this May, there are 3 additional representatives which are appointed by ICH for 3 years. And these are the NMPA from China, Saudi Arabian SFDA, and IFPMA, which is the International Pharmaceutical Industry Association. And please be aware of the following disclaimers and copyright notices as well. ICH is not only the owner of MedDRA, but also owns the training material used in this webinar. It is protected worldwide, but you may use the slides with the exception of the ICH and MSSO logos. But you will have to clearly indicate that ICH owns the copyright. And you would also need to, if you make any adaptations of the slides, you have to clearly label these as your own adaptations. The second bullet, I will read it out. The presentation is provided as is without warranty of any kind. In no event shall the ICH or the authors of the original presentation be liable for any claim, damages, or other liability arising from the use of the presentation. And the third bullet point talks about third-party slides, but this is not relevant today. These are the topics that we will cover today. We will review the content of the ICH document, MedDRA Data Retrieval and Presentation Points to Consider document. We will focus on the part which we've not discussed in last week's webinar on data retrieval and analysis. We will discuss the features of standardized MedDRA queries, the SMQs, including the background and the data characteristics, the impact of MedDRA versioning on the SMQs, and benefits and limitations of SMQs. And then I will demonstrate how to explore SMQs in the SMQ view of the MedDRA browser, and also a very helpful SMQ analysis feature, which is also inbuilt into the browser and how it can be used. We will address the SMQ applications and look into 2 scenarios for the use of the SMQs. And last but not least, we will address the so-called customized searches, where you build your own query or where you adapt an existing SMQ. And we will conclude with a questions and answer session, but I will also stop in certain intervals and ask Leander whether you had any questions in between, because I always think it's easier to have the question answered once it occurs, and then to be able to follow the rest of the presentation better. So before starting, I would like to test the polling tool and also ask you some questions about your MedDRA knowledge, where you're joining from, and so on, as in a short exercise to see whether you are able to join the tool and whether it's working for you. So you can either scan the QR code with your cell phone or a tablet, or you can put the slido.com into your browser window, followed by the number 2568879. This will be added into the prompt, which is on the web page, slido.com. These credentials are shown on every slide, so let's move on. And my first question to you is, where are you joining from today? I think I need to click one more to see where people are joining from. Hello, France, lots of people from Germany, from Greece, Turkey, Czech Republic. Very broad representation. Oh, Korea, good evening. People from Texas, United States, very early time for you to join. From the Philippines, so a broad worldwide representation, I would say, with a focus on Europe, of course, because it's in the European time zone. I see people are still typing, still answering the questions, so we give it just a few more minutes, seconds. Okay, then let's move on. And I would like to ask you about your general MedDRA knowledge. So have you been working with MedDRA for a longer time? Or are you a beginner? Please use 1 if you're a complete beginner, 5 if you're an expert. And also here I see that we have a good distribution. Many people in an intermediate knowledge level, some complete beginners, few experts. So my next question would be, what is your knowledge on SMQs and customized MedDRA queries? Which of course can be different. So more people feeling they are beginners with the SMQs and customized MedDRA queries, which is good to have people who have already some MedDRA knowledge so that it's not completely new to them, but now trying to understand better how to use SMQs and customized MedDRA queries. Thanks a lot for responding to this one. And then just for me to understand how much repetition we need and how deep I go into some parts which is repetitious, I would like to ask you to answer the question whether you joined the previous webinar, Data Analysis and Query Building with MedDRA, which was given last week. And I see that many people did not. So I will maybe focus a bit more, provide a bit more detail on the part which is a repetition of last week's webinar. For those people who feel I was going too quick, please just look on our YouTube channel and you will be able to also view that webinar on YouTube if you missed it last week. Okay. Thanks a lot. So I would like to start with the ICH guidance document on MedDRA data retrieval and presentation, which is a points to consider document, so it's not binding, but provides you with a lot of helpful considerations on how to use MedDRA in data retrieval. This is the cover page of the document, and I will stop shortly afterwards to show you where you can find the document. The document provides data retrieval and presentation options, both for industry and for regulatory purposes. Of course, it should be used in conjunction with the MedDRA term selection points to consider document. This is the ICH released coding guidance. And we will come to that again later on. But if you add good quality, standardized quality to your database, your output will be a lot better. So using both PTC documents in combination is the most appropriate. The document also recommends that it should be used as a basis for individual organizations' own data retrieval conventions, or that these conventions should be aligned with the principles discussed in the document. So let me shortly show you where you can find it. This is our MedDRA.org website. If you go to How to Use and then to Support Documentation, you can find the Points to Consider documents. This is for English, but you can also find the documents for many other languages. And you can find them in a PDF, a Word document format, or an HTML internet format. And you see here the MedDRA term selection points to consider document. Then here the MedDRA data retrieval and presentation points to consider document, as well as a further document which is called MedDRA points to consider companion document, which also provides general principles on data quality and a lot of coding guidance for medication errors, product issues, and manufacturing and quality system issues. In addition to these documents, you always find a redlined version, so a version in Word format which shows you the changes to the previous version. Okay. The document is developed by the ICH M1 working group and is updated on an annual basis, and it is always released with the 1st of March MedDRA version. This is the major MedDRA version, or the more comprehensive MedDRA version. Complete versions are available in several languages, and I think this is not even completely up to date, because we now have a French translation for the complete version. And then we have condensed versions available for other MedDRA languages, and you can see them at the bottom of the page. And of course, if we have the complete version available, we don't maintain the condensed versions. The condensed versions are not updated yearly, but just on an as-needed basis, because they don't include as many examples and are not up-versioned every time. They are available, as you saw, on the MedDRA.org website, as well as on the JMO website. JMO is our partner organization, the Japanese maintenance organization. Oops, sorry. So let's look again at what this document addresses. And we discussed the first 2 bullet points in more detail in our last meeting. So it starts off with general principles. And one of the big principles is the quality of source data. So there is a big chapter on how to achieve good quality source data, including guidance on the conversion of legacy data, follow-up, and that good quality data should be a main goal, and how to achieve that. Then it continues talking about documentation of data retrieval and presentation practices. And this includes things to consider, like the versioning, a documentation of the process of how a MedDRA query is set up, that you document the searches, that you document the in- and exclusion criteria, etc., etc. It also talks about a very important MedDRA principle, which is do not alter MedDRA. MedDRA is a standardized terminology, and it has a standard hierarchy which should be used. So if you choose to code to an LLT, this links to a PT, the preferred term. The PT then links to an HLT or several HLTs. That is the high-level term. And if you have more than one high-level term, there is also an assignment of a primary high-level term. And this will then link to an HLGT, high-level grouping term, and then to the so-called system organ class, the SOC. And so every term is linked to one primary SOC, and this should not be changed. You can, of course, do your analysis also on secondary SOCs if you have a question where it is more appropriate to do that. But the first, if you aggregate all your data and display a complete data set, this should be on primary SOC, because then everybody would be looking at the same sorting of the PTs into SOCs. You can also consider that there is an internationally agreed SOC order, which you can use, so that if you're using different MedDRA languages where the SOCs are called differently and might appear in a different alphabetical order, that using the internationally agreed SOC order will achieve that you would use the same order of SOCs, whether you use it in German, in French, in Korean, in Chinese. And everybody would start looking from the most important disorders to the least important, which are social circumstances, surgical and medical procedures, product issues, and so on. So this is also important to consider, that please do not change MedDRA, use it as it is provided. The document talks about organization-specific data characteristics, and these can be related to your database. So what kind of database fields do you have? How do you fill these fields? How do you, for example, how did your organization decide on specific coding guidances? The term selection PTC document provides several options in instances. For example, whether to code a diagnosis and the signs and symptoms, or whether to code only the diagnosis. And depending on what kind of decision your organization took, your data will look differently. So if you code the diagnosis only, you will see less PT counts than if you code the diagnosis plus signs and symptoms. And this is something you would need to know and consider when you're doing your data analysis. Then there are certain characteristics of MedDRA that impact data retrieval and analysis. And this is, of course, on the one hand, the multi-axiality, but then there are also some SOCs which are uni-axial, where you would just see a PT in that one SOC. So also MedDRA characteristics will impact how you look at your data. And also we have some rules on which SOC will be given to a PT as a primary link. And some SOCs have a higher priority than other SOCs. And these are the neoplasms, the congenital, and infections and infestations. These SOCs are given with a higher priority than the disorder SOCs, which are based on anatomy. So also having a good understanding of MedDRA and its characteristics will help you in assessing the impact on data retrieval and analysis. As well, MedDRA versioning. We will go into MedDRA versioning a bit again today because it's very important also for the standardized MedDRA queries, but consider that MedDRA is evolving. We are constantly adding terms. Sometimes we're making terms non-current because they are ambiguous or not up to date anymore. And we might change the hierarchy of terms. So if you look at your data in one MedDRA version and then redo your analysis and look at it in another MedDRA version, you might see changes in your data which are solely based on the changes in MedDRA. And knowing about those changes will help you understand why you see changes in your data. Sometimes it might be at first look a bit concerning to you that maybe if a PT changed the primary link and all of a sudden, if you're looking at the counts of the complete SOC, you see a big increase. And in the end, if you look at what changed in MedDRA, you see that actually your data did not really change, but the way it is displayed because of the characteristics and the changes in MedDRA, you see it in a different way. So I will show you a bit more on how you can find out about the MedDRA versions. Then we discussed in the last meeting also the general queries and retrieval strategies. We looked at the MedDRA browser and how to use something called the research bin for grouping PT terms when building a query. But we also discussed general principles, and in our last slides, we will look at those again in not as much detail, but as a summary. What kind of thoughts, considerations do you need to have when you're building a query of your own? Our main topic today will be the standardized MedDRA queries, and then we will also look at how a standardized MedDRA query can be changed into a customized or modified MedDRA query based on a standardized MedDRA query. And also again at how you build a query from scratch if there is nothing which you can use. Okay, let's look a bit more on the MedDRA versioning. You all know that MedDRA is updated twice a year. We have the 1st of March release, which includes all levels of the hierarchy. And we have the 1st of September release, which only includes changes to the LLT and PT level. What is very important is that the MedDRA version used in data retrieval and presentation needs to be the same version as the data, your coded data. And this version needs to be documented. We have certain resources which help you understand what changed between versions, and that is our What's New document, and we also have a What's New webinar. There is a version report, which is an Excel format that lists all the changes in different tabs, like new LLTs, new PTs, SOC changes of PTs, moving of LLTs to a different PT, the SMQ changes, etc., which is comparing the new version to the previous version. And then we have the MedDRA version analysis tool, which is provided by the MSSO as a web-based application, but also now in the web-based browsers. And this can help you analyze two versions which don't need to be consecutive. So you will get as an output a similar Excel workbook as the version report, but it's not limited to the previous to the new version, but you can look at any two versions. And then we have the MedDRA best practice document, which is a document which gives you a lot of considerations on when and how to change MedDRA versions, mainly for clinical trials. In pharmacovigilance, most regulators ask you to change to the next MedDRA version on 1st of November and 1st of May. To change, or not the 1st of September, the first Monday of November and the first Monday of May, to change the new MedDRA version for reporting. So that is when most pharmacovigilance databases will be up-versioned to the new MedDRA version. For clinical trials, you have more freeway, and the MedDRA best practice document provides you with a lot of considerations on how to up-version or why not to up-version. Okay, let's look a little bit more on the MedDRA version analysis tool called also MVAT. You can find it under this link. It's free to all users, and it has several features. It has a version report generator, which produces an Excel sheet comparing any two versions. You can upload your MedDRA coded terms into a data impact report, where changes to your specific set of MedDRA terms are identified. The codes which are uploaded are not stored on our website, so there should not be any privacy issues with using this functionality. And it's quite nice if you have a list of all the codes of the last several years. You can really see what kind of impact a MedDRA version change has on your specific data set. And the search term change is still available on the web application. Sorry. But not in the MedDRA browsers, because there is another way to do it. the MedDRA version analysis tool has a user face and a report output available in all MedDRA languages. You have the ability to run reports also on supplemental changes. This means the changes which are already approved by the MSSO but will become MedDRA terms in the next MedDRA version. So you can already see what will be there for the next MedDRA release. You can include secondary SOC changes in the reports, and because it's quite interesting, and we usually don't have enough time in our other webinars to show in detail how the MVAT can be used. We have a two-part webinar which you can locate in our training materials tab on the MedDRA website. Okay. Then let's start off with our standardized MedDRA queries. Before looking at the standardized MedDRA queries, let's look at this as a short reminder of what a query is and how it works. So let me illustrate this using this graph. We start off from the left-hand side, and you see that we have a clinical trial or a drug safety database. And these databases contain cases with events coded to MedDRA LLTs. So in the database, we have a list of LLTs assigned to reported adverse events for each particular patient. Then somebody builds a query, which is a list of PTs. It can be a standardized MedDRA query. It can be a query which you build yourself, an ad hoc query. But it's a list of PTs which represent a condition of interest. And these PTs, or the LLTs below these PTs, will then be matched with the LLTs coded in the cases. And if you have a match between an LLT in your query and an LLT in the case, you have a hit. And this case will be retrieved from the database for further analysis. So this happens in the background, and usually your output is you get a list of, either you get a count of cases for a specific topic of interest, or you get a list of cases where you can see more detail. Usually we talk about summary tabulations, which gives you an overview of the counts of how often did this PT occur in the database, or you get a line listing, which is then a breakdown by patient ID, and you get a list of the topic of interest, often together with the other events which occurred in that same patient, plus some demographic data. This is something which you can set up depending on your needs and your database characteristics. Usually a query is not run by the people looking at the data in the end, but you have the statisticians doing it on clinical trials often, or you have people maintaining the database, kind of like IT people who run the query for you and provide you with the result. Sometimes, of course, you might be doing it yourself, but often you need to talk to somebody else to get your query run on your database. Okay, what now is a standardized MedDRA query? Soon after MedDRA was more widely used, it became obvious that standard queries would help, because there are certain topics which are relevant for more than one drug. And so people were doing different queries for different drugs in different companies. And it was difficult to compare the results between the drugs or between companies. So there was a big effort to develop standardized MedDRA queries. And these were developed by the Science Group, which was a group built of industry and regulatory counterparts. And they looked at the topic of interest and designed a query. And like any other query, the SMQs can represent signs and symptoms, diagnosis, syndromes, physical findings, laboratory or other test data, etc. And as other queries, they are intended to aid in case identification. And the difference here is that they are standardized, they are pre-built for you, and if they are used as a standardized MedDRA query, you can be sure that the regulator uses it in the same way as you do it or another company does it. But that is also why it's important to not change a standardized MedDRA query. For version 28.0 as well as for version 28.1, there is a total of 110 level 1 SMQs in production, and here you just see a short list of these. And level 1 means that this is the highest level because we have hierarchical SMQs where you have sub-SMQs to these level 1 SMQs. So what you see here is just, as I said, a short list of all the SMQs which we have. But you see we have SMQs for medical conditions like hypersensitivity, hepatic disorders, convulsions. But you will also find SMQs for topics like lack of drug effect or medication errors. I would recommend that you make yourself familiar with the topics that are covered by SMQs to be able to use them for queries in your database. This way, you will not be surprised if you receive a letter from a regulator pointing out a specific safety issue of your product, because regulators often use these SMQs on a regular basis for safety signaling in their databases. And you might also have a database where SMQs are already built into the signaling steps of the database. So you will find more information about all SMQs in the introductory guide for standardized MedDRA queries, where the queries are defined. It's defining the condition, and the guide also provides in- and exclusion criteria, which were used in building these queries, plus additional information about the structure, and if it's applicable, the hierarchy or a potential algorithm of the respective SMQ and how to best use it. So we will talk about hierarchy and algorithm in the next few slides. This is a really valuable resource to get more information on each of the SMQs, and I would recommend that you consult it if you're considering using an SMQ, because it describes the in- and exclusion criteria, and if you're interested in more or less, you might want to add terms, and then it would not be a standardized MedDRA query anymore. But this is something which we will also discuss later on. So let's look into the SMQ data characteristics. And we will address these in more detail in the next few slides. We will talk about the MedDRA term inclusion. We will talk about the scope. We will talk about algorithms and hierarchy. And we will shortly talk about the status of both SMQs, but also about the status of terms within an SMQ. And I will discuss a bit about the versioning in an SMQ. The first point is about MedDRA term inclusion. And as already addressed previously, when looking at the graph explaining what a query is, SMQs are constructed at MedDRA PT level. This means that all the LLTs and just the LLTs under these PTs are automatically included. So if you include a PT, then all of its LLTs are included as well. And you can see that there is a big increase in the number between the PTs in MedDRA and the LLTs in MedDRA. And all of these terms are included. And remember the image that we saw before, where we had the database and the clipboard, and we said that a customized MedDRA query or SMQ is just a list of PTs. They get broken down to LLTs, and when running a query, there is this matching process between the LLTs of the query and the LLTs used for coding the cases in your database. Then the next topic is very important to understand. All PTs in a given SMQ are classified as either narrow or broad terms. And the narrow preferred terms provide specificity. And this means the cases are highly likely to represent a condition of interest. So they may be the condition itself, or in a different wording, or signs and symptoms that are very highly likely to be indicative of the condition of interest. And we will look at some SMQs and you will understand what I mean. The broad preferred terms will provide sensitivity and will retrieve all possible relevant cases. These will rather be lab tests or symptoms that could be characteristic for the condition of interest, but could also relate to another medical condition. So with the narrow scope, you're throwing a very small net to retrieve mainly those cases which will be your condition of interest. And with a broad scope, you try to look a bit on the sides to retrieve more cases which might or might not be relevant. And for the concept, it is very important to understand that if you want to run a broad search, to have a more sensitive search, to retrieve more cases, you also need to include the narrow terms. So the narrow search will only include the narrow terms. A broad search will always include the narrow terms and the broad terms. And this is also quite easy to understand, because if you're looking for a topic of interest, you want, of course, the specific cases in your broad search, but then also a bit more. That is why you need to run the broad and the narrow terms in addition. And here we have the example of the SMQ lactic acidosis. And you see that our narrow search term list is quite small. It includes just 3 terms, which are very specific. So we have blood lactic acid increase, which is a lab term, very specific for lactic acidosis. We have hyperlactacidemia and lactic acidosis. So with these 3 narrow search terms, you're very likely to retrieve a case which is of interest for you. And then if you look at the broad search terms, you see acid-base balance abnormal, acidosis, you see blood pH decreased, you see blood pH abnormal. So these are terms which might give you cases of interest, especially if the cases are not very specifically coded. But you might also retrieve cases which are not lactic acidosis, but metabolic acidosis or any other type of acidosis. So when looking and reviewing your cases, you might increase noise in your search if you add the broad search terms. But you also, and again, if you converted your data from another legacy terminology, which might not have the same granularity as MedDRA, it might be good to include the broad search terms, because maybe the acidosis gives you further cases of lactic acidosis. So this is how you have to see the narrow search and the broad search terms. And again, the narrow search strategy, it will maximize the specificity. So how good does the concept match your specific safety topic? And the broad search strategy, the narrow plus the broad search terms, maximizes sensitivity so that you're not missing any relevant cases. But it will also increase the number of cases which you retrieve which are not specific to your topic of interest. Okay. Then let's look at algorithmic SMQs. Some SMQs are designed to use algorithms. And 10 out of the 110 SMQs that are currently in production use an algorithm for case identification. And you usually have the narrow search terms, and then you include terms if they have a combination of broad search terms. And this has been done because just using the broad search terms increased the noise in the test data sets, but by combining several broad search categories, it was possible again to retrieve cases with a better specificity. And if we now look at one of the SMQs which has this algorithm, this is the anaphylactic reactions SMQ. And you see in the narrow search terms, you have quite a lot of terms which you would expect to retrieve cases for anaphylaxis with. But then you have quite a lot of cases in the category B, C, and D in the broad categories. And these are not all the terms which are included. It's just a subset. But you see that we have terms for very unspecific terms for upper airway and respiratory conditions. We have quite unspecific terms for angioedema, urticaria, like the term erythema can be anything if it's the only term which is reported in a case. And then we have terms in category D on cardiovascular and hypotension. And the algorithm works as such that a case from the category A, so the narrow terms, will always be retrieved for further analysis. But then if you are looking at the broad search, you would just retrieve the cases if they have only broad search terms, if they have a term from category B and a term from category C. So upper airway respiratory plus angioedema urticaria terms. Or a term from either category B or C plus a term from category D. So upper airway plus cardiovascular hypertension would be a case which you would retrieve, or angioedema urticaria plus cardiovascular hypertension. And because people understand things a bit differently, this is the same information in a flowchart. So if you're looking at your cases, there is a narrow search term, yes, the case will be reviewed. No narrow search term, just broad search terms. Do we have something from category B? Yes. Plus something from category C? Yes, case will be reviewed. Nothing from category B? Then let's look category C, yes. Do we find something from category D? Yes, then the case is reviewed. If not, no. If we have category B, yes, but then no term from category C, but from category D, we will review the case. If we don't have the category D term, we will not review the case. So just a different picture of how this algorithm can work. And it's a bit complicated. Often these algorithms cannot be directly run on the database, so there is some programming needed, either after retrieving the cases or while retrieving the cases, to make this algorithm work. So if you're considering using this algorithm, it might be helpful to first talk to your statisticians or database technicians whether they can use the algorithmic searches. If not, I will show you another way on how you can use your data and use the algorithm within the MedDRA browsers. Then let's look at hierarchical SMQs. Some of the SMQs have an overarching topic and then several, what we often call sub-SMQs. The main topic is divided into further queries, which are related to one another in a hierarchical relationship. And please see this completely separate from the MedDRA hierarchy. This is for one safety topic, and it's just for the SMQs. And you can then decide on how broad your search should be, whether you want to have one of these subordinate SMQs or whether you want a combination of these to look at a more inclusive SMQ, which is maybe more focused on the topic which you're looking at. And we will also look at some SMQs which are hierarchical. So one of these examples is the SMQ, and this is quite an easy example for a hierarchical SMQ, the SMQ on hematopoietic cytopenias. And you know that there are three main types of blood cells: the erythrocytes, leukocytes, and then thrombocytes. So you can have a hematopoietic erythropenia, you can have the hematopoietic leukopenia, and the hematopoietic thrombocytopenia. Or you have a cytopenia which affects more than one type of blood cells. So depending on what you're interested in, you could either just look at the hematopoietic erythropenias, or you combine all of them together, or you say, I'm more interested into the cytopenias which affect more than one type of blood cells. But it would really depend on what you're interested in. We have more difficult examples where the sub-SMQs go down to level 5, and that is, for example, the SMQ hepatic disorders. And I will also show you in the browser a bit more about hierarchical SMQs. Then we have SMQs. SMQs have a status, and the terms within an SMQ have a status. We call this active and inactive, also in order to make it different from the currency which of the MedDRA terms, where we have current MedDRA terms or non-current MedDRA terms. So the SMQs can have a status active or inactive. We just have one SMQ which is inactive, which is the adverse pregnancy outcomes. And this one was removed from the ASCII files and is archived. And I can show you where you can find some information if you're interested in that one. This SMQ was removed because we have a new SMQ, which is called Pregnancy and Neonatal Topics. Also, every term in an SMQ has a status. So if a PT was added to an SMQ at some point, but is not needed anymore, or was shown that it was too noisy, it was not helpful, then this term can be flagged as inactive. The term will still be shown in the SMQ overview, but it should not be used anymore for data retrieval. So you would just use those active PTs for data retrieval if you use the SMQ, but you would still see that at some point a PT was active in an SMQ and made inactive, and is no longer used for data retrieval. So after talking about the making terms inactive, we're also adding terms to SMQs. So with each MedDRA version, the MSSO is also looking at the SMQs, at all new PTs, at all changes to PTs, and decides whether some of the new PTs match a certain safety topic and would need to be added to the SMQs. From a versioning perspective, it is very important that organizations use the SMQ with the data coded with the same version of MedDRA. So always match the MedDRA version of the SMQ with the MedDRA version of the coded data. And a mismatch of SMQ and MedDRA coded data could produce unexpected results. And for example, if you're looking at a PT which was added in MedDRA version 23.0, which is the PT hormone receptor positive breast cancer, which was added to the SMQ breast malignant tumors. If you would use the SMQ version 22.1 on data which was coded in 23.0, and you had some of these terms, some cases reporting exactly hormone receptor positive breast cancer, and you coded it to this PT. When you use the SMQ in version 22.1, you would fail to identify these cases and to retrieve the cases for further review. So this is the risk or disadvantage if you use an SMQ which is not in the same MedDRA version as your coded data. So this is a good time, Leander, to ask whether there are any questions. And then I would like to show you some additional useful information on our website.
Thank you, Anne. Not at this time. There's no questions. We were asked about, can you show examples of narrow and broad searches, narrow and broad terms, but then you went on and demonstrated those in the slides, and I know you're going to do that in the browser. So
okay, good. I will first show some other documents which are providing more information, like the MedDRA introductory guide, where you can find something about SMQs. But later on, we will also have a browser demonstration. Okay, let me find. So this is our MedDRA.org website. And I already showed you where to find the points to consider documents. If you go to how to use and then to tools, I will open this nice picture, and you see here that we have something on SMQs. You also see the MVAT, the MedDRA version analysis tool, which I discussed briefly before. You find something on mappings. APIs is something very technical. It's some interfaces directly between the databases. And then you have something on our browsers. But let's go to SMQs. You have a complete web page which describes a bit more about SMQs. But in the related links, and I hope you can see it, you can find something which is called SMQ status. If you open that document, it opens a PDF which lists all SMQ topics for this MedDRA version as of 1st of September. And you can see those 110 level 1 SMQ topics. So this is maybe a helpful tool for those who would like to look at what kind of SMQs we have. Then very interesting also is the SMQ matrix, which opens an Excel document. And this document gives an overview of all SMQ topics which have been requested at any time. And you can filter for the status. Let me check whether I can do it here. I would need to maybe download the file for better filtering options. But you see that lots of them are in production. If you scroll down, you also sometimes see more information. So in which MedDRA version the SMQ was approved to be developed. But then you also see that there are some discontinued SMQs, and you get a note why these were not continued into development. And then you also see that some SMQ topics were rejected after considering the applicability, the use of these SMQs, and you get a note on these. And sometimes there are SMQs in development, which I don't see now, but you see here the adverse pregnancy outcomes has the status archived and no longer in production, and that it was replaced by the SMQ pregnancy and neonatal topics. So this is also a very interesting file, especially if you're looking for a topic which you don't find and where you consider to request it to the MSSO to develop a new SMQ. Please check this file and see whether it has been requested maybe before, what were the reasons not to develop the SMQ, and consider this in whether something changed in the meantime and you think it's still a valuable SMQ topic and you have good argumentation. Of course, you can resubmit the SMQ topic. Or if you don't find an SMQ topic, you know it has never been submitted, and you could consider whether it's helpful maybe for other users as well. Then there is also some additional information on case studies, which provides you with some literature on how other people used SMQs, as well as you have a link to the training material, to the SMQ support documentation. This puts you to the overall side of the support documentation, and also a link to the Science SMQ Red Book. Science was the organization which developed most of our SMQs, but in 2000, I don't remember, the development of SMQs was handed over to the MSSO, and now the MSSO is developing new SMQs together with a group of experts formed from industry and regulators, which is then set up if a new SMQ needs to be developed. So I wanted to show you this as a helpful place to find more information on SMQs. And then we have another very helpful Excel spreadsheet, which provides you with a lot of information on SMQs. So this has several tabs. It's called SMQ spreadsheet, then the MedDRA version, and this is the English version. The first tab provides you an overview on the SMQ hierarchy, and you can open the hierarchy. You can also open it completely, and you see the different levels. You can go down to just a few levels, and you see it gives you an overview of how the hierarchy looks. Then on the second tab, SMQ 28.1, if you open the list here, and this is accidents and injuries, it provides you an overview of all the terms which are included in the SMQ accidents and injuries. If you use another one, the biliary disorders, for example, you see this is the level 1 SMQ. Below the level 1, there are level 2 SMQs. And if you open one of the level 2 SMQs, it goes to the level 3 SMQs. And only then on the 4th level, you find the terms. So this is helpful for looking into SMQs if you like the Excel format. It also has a very nice overview on SMQ summary. And here, for example, you have all of the SMQs, not only the level 1 SMQs, but if you, oh yes, you do. You have the level 1 SMQs, and it shows you whether it has a narrow or broad scope. So this first, or this one which is shown at the highest now, oropharyngeal disorders, you see it's a hierarchical SMQ. It is the level 1 SMQ, and the level 1, as I showed you on this other one, does not have narrow or broad PTs, but it has a level 2 SMQ below it. So this is why it says no here. And then you can also see which ones are the algorithmic SMQs. So for example, the systemic lupus erythematosus is an algorithmic SMQ, or the tumor lysis syndrome, the neuroleptic malignant syndrome, and I wanted to show you the acute pancreatitis, for example. For the systemic lupus erythematosus, this is a very special one because it is both algorithmic, plus there is, because even with the algorithm, it was not specific enough, so something like called weights was also included. So a case, every term also has a weight, and just if the weight of the broad search terms is more than 6, the case will be retrieved for analysis. So this is one more addition to make the broad search more specific. The next tab shows you the active PT counts and inactive PT counts. And comparing this, you can see that there is sometimes a term made inactive. Usually it's not many terms, but this is how you can see it. And then this is also something which people find very helpful. it gives you the PT codes for any SMQ. So you see here, for example, to start a point QT prolongation SMQ, the PT counts, the PT codes for the narrow search, but then also the PT codes for the narrow and broad search. The PT codes are numbers which identify a PT across different MedDRA languages and across different MedDRA versions. So even if what we don't do often, if you rename a PT because it was misspelled, because a hyphen was missing or should not have been there, the PT code stays the same. And with that PT code, the PT is identified, and these codes can often be used in the database directly. So if you give this to the database technicians, they are often able to use this in the query they are using. For this SMQ spreadsheet, and this is included in the release package of each MedDRA version, and it can only be accessed with the subscriber's MedDRA ID and password for the respective MedDRA version. So if you have difficulty in finding this, it might be good to contact your MedDRA point of contact. And if you have time at the end, and there are questions on how to find the MedDRA point of contact, we can take this at the end. And if you're interested, please put a question into the chat. And Leander will remind me at the end. Okay, this is the SMQ spreadsheet, which is providing a lot of good information on SMQs. Let me jump back. So,
Anne,
yes.
Sorry, would you mind just showing where you got the documentation from again? Would you mind just demonstrating that?
Okay,
I know you showed.
sure.
Could you just do it again? Thank you. I put the link in the chat as well to this page.
Okay, so we have different ways of accessing it. We went through the tools, how to use tools, and then to the SMQ page. From here, you could go to SMQ support documentation, where you find the points to consider documents on the one hand, which we looked at, and here the data retrieval and presentation points to consider document. And then with every MedDRA version, you get the additional MedDRA guides. So you get the introductory guide for standardized MedDRA queries, which is very important. You also get an introductory guide to MedDRA as such, and you get a what's new document. And the Excel sheet, which I've showed you, is in the downloads section. I think everybody can log in, but even if you download it, it asks you for a for the version password. So if you're interested in the English version, you would just download the complete release package. It opens a file, and here you would have the SMQ spreadsheet. You also get the introductory guide, the int guide, and the version report, as well as the what's new in the release package. But then if you click on the document, you are asked to enter the password. And this is a special password for the MedDRA version release. And you might need to, and now as I'm anyways showing, I can also show you where you can find your subscription contact. And this is our self-service application on the, and let's go back. It's called SSA here, self-service application. And retrieve details of point of contact. You would enter your email address. It recognizes the domain, so that is the @.com.org. You enter your email address, and it will send a code to your email. When you enter the code, it gives you the names of the persons within your organization who are the subscription contacts. And it would be best if you contact those people to get this, either the Excel file or the password which protects it. Okay, I think Leander, that answered the questions, right?
That's fantastic. Thank you, Anne. Appreciate that.
Great. Then let's look at benefits and limitations of using SMQs. The benefits of using an SMQ is that they can be applied across multiple therapeutic areas. They are not product or drug class specific. They are validated and have been rigorously tested before the release, and usually this is done in at least one industry and one regulatory database. They can be reused. They allow for standardized communication of safety information between the pharmaceutical companies and the regulators. And they also allow consistency in the way data retrievals are set up and run, so that companies and regulators would look at the same condition in the same way. The other big benefit is the efficiency part, because the SMQs are maintained and versioned centrally by the MedDRA Support Service Organization, MSSO, and the Japanese maintenance organization. And thereby, this reduces the amount of work to be done on your part. There are also some limitations, and one of them is that the SMQs do not cover all medical topics or safety issues. So there will still always be scenarios where you have to build your own query. And that is also important, why you need to know how to do it. And then after release into production, SMQs further evolve, they undergo further refinement. And even though they have been extensively tested during their development, it is only when they are put into production and subscribers start using them that we get feedback that maybe a term is missing, or that terms which are included may produce too much noise, so they might retrieve a lot of irrelevant cases. And every time when we add new terms, we cannot test them because they have not been used before. So if you feel that an SMQ is retrieving a lot of irrelevant cases, please make us aware, and we discuss and potentially change that particular PT. So now I would like to show you our in our web-based browsers how you can use these for searching in SMQs. I already opened it. Here is our new web-based browser. Let me open the old one and also start the other one again. Let's see. Okay. So you have you can toggle between the SOC view and the SMQ view. And we're going to use the SMQ view now. You see that this tree, the uppermost level, changes, and we're not looking at the system organ classes anymore, but at all of the SMQs. And you see we have a lot more SMQs than we have system organ classes. Before looking at specific SMQs, I would like to show you the legend. And this is where you find it. So you open this hamburger menu and click on legend. Last time we looked at the SOC legend. This time we would like to look at the SMQ legend. And you see that we have some red boxes around some terms. And this always means that something is inactive, that an SMQ is inactive, a PT within an SMQ is inactive, either the broad or the narrow search, or with a category, or that certain LLTs are inactive. Then we have the color of the PTs. That if a PT is colored blue, it's a narrow scope term. If it is colored red, it is a broad scope term. And if there is a letter behind the red colored PT, it means it's a broad scope with a certain category. So if we are now looking at an SMQ, let's open the acute renal failure SMQ. If you click on this plus sign, it opens up everything. And you see that it has, on the one hand, the blue PTs, these are the narrow PTs, and it has a lot of red PTs, which are the broad ones. And out of these broad PTs, there is one which is inactive, the nephritic syndrome. And this is an example of an SMQ which includes both broad and narrow search terms. There is one which is called lacrimal disorders, which only has narrow search terms, so just blue PTs. This means there are some of the SMQs which just include narrow search terms. There are many which include both broad and narrow search terms. Now I would like to show you one of the algorithmic SMQs, and we can look at the acute pancreatitis, for example. You see it has the blue PTs, the narrow search, also here an inactive PT. And then you see we have the broad red PTs with the category B, then a category C, and that's it. So this is how we can see the scope within the coloring of the PTs. And now I would like to show you one of our most complex hierarchical SMQ, and this is the hepatic disorders. And if you're looking at the drug-related hepatic disorders comprehensive search as a level 2 SMQ, it includes several level 3 SMQs. And when we're looking at the drug-related hepatic disorders, severe events only, we see further sub-SMQs, and then we have the liver neoplasms, malignant and unspecified. And only on this 5th level, when we open it, we see that it includes the PTs. So for these very complex ones, it helps if you open the SMQ introductory guide. Let's search for the hepatic disorders. And here you see also the structure. It gives a definition. It provides in- and exclusion criteria. But then for this one, it also provides a nice hierarchical structure where you see how these different sub-SMQs interrelate with each other. And to make this complete, we also have then notes on implementation. So this is a hierarchical SMQ with both broad and narrow search terms. This would also describe if it was an algorithmic search. And you could also check acute pancreatitis. Again, a definition, in- and exclusion criteria, and then it describes how the algorithm should be used, so that you see where you can find more information. But this is not the only way to find information, because if you're still looking at the hepatic disorders, if you right-click on this and then open the details and occurrences, a separate window opens and it gives you a short SMQ description. It tells you the SMQ code, the name, plus the level. It gives you the status and also tells you whether it's algorithmic or not. And then here it describes what can be found in this SMQ. If you then open one of the sub-level SMQs, open details and occurrences, you see the SMQ code, the SMQ name, the level, which is 5 now, and also a short description of what you can expect from this SMQ sub-search. So this is something which I wanted to show you, but then also you can start searching in SMQs, and let's search for arrhythmia. And it will provide you, on the one hand, all SMQs which include the term arrhythmia, or your search term. So you see that there are 11 SMQs which include arrhythmia at some level. You can see the PTs which are included in the arrhythmia, or which PTs including arrhythmia in the term name, and which are included in any of the SMQs, and as well the LLTs. Let's look at the PTs. If I open here the open details and occurrences, it shows you the code and name. And of course, every PT has an LLT which is the same as the PT name. And it also gives you an overview in which SMQs you can find this term. So arrhythmia is in cardiac arrhythmia terms non-specific, and in the cardiomyopathy SMQ, for example. If you look at fetal arrhythmia, it has also a code and the name, and then you see it's in the congenital and neonatal arrhythmias SMQ, and in the fetal disorders SMQ. So this is also a nice way to see where these are located, but you can also open here and you see the SMQs. Okay, any questions to how you browse SMQs in our MedDRA browsers?
Not at the moment, thank you, Anne.
Okay, great. I think this was all which I wanted to show you here. So let's move back. And now I would like to show you how to use our SMQ analysis tool. And we've already seen our browsers, but just for those of you who are not very familiar, we have 3 browsers: a MedDRA desktop browser, which is independent of the internet, which you download and where you load the release files into the application, and then you are independent of internet. We have the web-based browsers. At the moment, we are having 2, the one which I showed you, which is our new web-based browser, plus the legacy web-based browser, which is also still there and will be kept for some time in the future. Then we have a mobile MedDRA browser, which is specifically designed for mobile devices, and more for searching than for analysis of MedDRA. So all of our browsers require a MedDRA ID and password. You can view MedDRA and the SMQs, so the MedDRA hierarchy plus the SMQs. All our browsers support all MedDRA languages, and they also have language-specific interfaces. And in the bigger browsers, not the mobile browser, you have the ability to export search results and to use something which we call research bin, where you can collect PTs, LLTs, HLTs, and you can export all these results to your local file system. You can view primary and secondary link information, and we looked at this in more detail in the last webinar. And these are interesting now. You can upload terms to run against SMQs. This is something which I will show you now. But also you have advanced search options with the Boolean operators not or. And what is also nice, you can preview the upcoming, the so-called supplemental changes in the which are to be released in the next MedDRA version. This is not available on the desktop browser because there you load the data, the release MedDRA version, and it's not in the internet, so you don't get these supplemental changes. So how to run an SMQ? From an IT perspective, an SMQ is nothing more than a stored query. It depends a bit on your organization, how you code and store your data. Many do it as LLTs or as PTs. And then the SMQ files include both PTs and LLTs, and you can decide whether you run the query based on your organization specifics on LLT or PT level. And remember, there is this matching process. You load the SMQ into your query tool, you run the query against your coded MedDRA terms in the database, and if there is a hit, this case will be retrieved, will either be counted or it will be retrieved with more information for you to review in more detail. We also already discussed the scope of SMQs, that you can have a narrow and a broad search. So this is something which you need to define when you're asking for the query to be run. Do I want only the narrow search, or do I want the narrow and the broad search? If it's an algorithmic SMQ, do I want the algorithm to be run as well? And here, always the reminder, please check with your database technicians before whether they can easily do it or whether there's programming needed, which would need more time maybe. And then also for the hierarchical options, decide whether you want the level 1, including all the sub-SMQs, or whether you want to limit your search to some a combination of sub-SMQs or just one sub-SMQ. So now we have a practical question, and we have a data set of 17 cases, maybe a small clinical trial. You have the your database technicians already retrieved those cases. They gave you all the terms from a broad and narrow search, or they gave you all the terms which were included in those cases. And now you would like to know which of these cases are hits for any SMQ. So potential cases of interest of a topic which was made into an SMQ. And we have the SMQ analysis feature. And from here on, I will just switch back to the presentation. And I will show you in our browser how we do this. So we have the tools here in the old web-based browser. Let me log in again. We have the button up here, hierarchy analysis. We will continue in the new browser, but if you're still using the old one, this is, SMQ analysis next to hierarchy analysis. So if you're still using the old browser, use this SMQ analysis button and it opens up a new window. We're going to use it here. You see when we open this tools button, we get the SMQ analysis, the hierarchy analysis, or the embed. We are today doing the SMQ analysis. The default option is that your data file is run against all the SMQs, but you can also filter. If you're just interested in the acute pancreatitis, you click it and it is a highlight in yellow, and you will just run this your file against acute pancreatitis. You always choose the language, you choose the version. We're going back to 28.0 because our training material was done in that version. And then we need to say whether we want a narrow or broad search. Remember, the narrow search has only the narrow search term. The broad search has both narrow and broad search terms. Let's do the broad search. And then we click next. It will ask us to upload our data, and the data needs to be in a certain format. So it's telling you it needs to be an Excel spreadsheet with an optional row ID. Then we need the LLT or PT term and the code plus a case ID. The case ID is important because not for the narrow broad SMQ search, but if you want to do the algorithmic search, the case ID is important to link certain lines together. So I prepared an Excel spreadsheet with the row ID, the term name, the code, and the case ID. And I will now close it again because otherwise I cannot load it into the tool. I click here, it will ask me to find my spreadsheet. So it's the SMQ analysis exercise. It takes a few seconds, and then a new Excel sheet is provided, and it opens, and you see that you get the row ID, you get the PT term, the code, and then you see which SMQ matched that PT. You see the scope of the SMQ, the category, if the broad term has a category. You see the weight, if there is a weight, and also whether it's active, inactive. You can see how an algorithm would be used, and here you have your case ID. And then it also shows you how these SMQs, whether it's a level 1 or which level of an SMQ it is. And from this part onwards, you could use your Excel functionalities to look more into detail into what kind of potential safety topics you might have. So this is quite long, and I would like to show you two things, and we are going to repeat this exercise. So we are going back here and we are loading the acute pancreatitis in the broad search. I use my same file as before. Let me open it already. You see now that many of the terms do not have a match. They are shown because we just wanted the SMQ pancreatitis matched. Let's filter for acute pancreatitis. If we're going here, you see we have 4 patients which are retrieved by this search. Now we know that acute pancreatitis also has an algorithmic search, and let's do that. We use the same file. It takes 2 seconds to run. We open our file, and this one already is filtered, just giving us those patients, those terms which match the algorithm. And you see it's just 3 lines now, and patient 7, which we had in this one, is missing. So the abdominal pain is not specific enough to fulfill the algorithm. So this is very unspecific. If you use the algorithm, this unspecific term disappears from your search results. Also interesting is another SMQ, which is the systemic lupus erythematosus. Let's first do the broad search. And we're still using my file. Again, you see that this is trying to match it to all SMQs. We can filter to see what comes out of the SMQ which we're interested in. And we see we have 3 patients, 13, 14, and 15. If we now rerun the version analysis on the algorithmic search, we see here that it's just 2 patients which are retrieved. And one is retrieved because of a narrow scope term, SLE arthritis. And the second one is retrieved because of a combination of broad scope terms, which in addition become in their weights more than 7, or more than 6, that is. So this is 7. If we now look at patient 15, it also has different broad scope terms, so might be a candidate, but then if looking at the weight, it does not become a case because of this weight. So this is how the SMQ analysis tool can be used to run the SMQs over a data set. And we had this very broad data set where you see all the SMQ topics for all your PTs. Or you can do it a bit more specific. If you're interested in a specific topic, you just run one SMQ. And if it's an algorithmic SMQ, you could also consider just running the algorithmic SMQ and to increase your specificity. So think about questions. We're going to go back to the presentation, which includes this in screenshots as well. So you can select SMQs or as a default, do it with all. This is run the broad search. These are the results which I showed you. You can filter your results. And these are the results of an algorithmic SMQ analysis, not limited to one SMQ as I showed you. And that's it, what I showed you in the tool directly. Leander, do we have any questions related to this?
No, currently no questions. Thank you, Anne.
Okay. Then let's look at SMQ applications. So SMQs were first mainly used in post-marketing, but it also became clear that in clinical trials it is helpful to look at your safety profile before it is fully established. So you could use multiple SMQs on a routine basis as a screening tool. And this is what I just showed you, that you have your small data set of 17 patients only, but you run all SMQs across this data set and you see where there are potential important topics, because most of the SMQs treat important safety topics. Or you define selected SMQs which could evaluate previously identified issues. For example, something which you know from your preclinical data, from the animal experiments, that there is a high likelihood that it might also occur in humans. So you could monitor your data based on that. Or you have a known class effect. Your drug is not the first of that drug class, and you know that other drugs in that class have a certain safety issue, and you just monitor whether it is the same with your drug or whether you're better or worse. So you can apply SMQs from phase 1 to phase 4, the marketed products, or in post-marketing. In the post-marketing, often you use selected SMQs because you have suspected or known safety issues which you want to monitor further to see whether the drug behaves the same in the market as under the controlled clinical conditions. You also often use SMQs for signal detection. Then you would use multiple SMQs which you run over your complete data set. This is often done in also if you buy data from, for example, Vigibase, if you look into the ultravigilance data set, or other bigger data sets which you might have access to. Often these data sets already include SMQs in the signal detection. And of course, it's then also meaningful to look at the data. You can also use SMQs for single case alerts. So many of the databases allow that once the case is processed, it is run against a certain set of PTs. And if there is a hit, this case is prioritized and provided to a safety physician for review on a single case level. So this is something you can do. You can also use SMQs in your case processing. And if you code a certain event which is of much interest, you might have a follow-up questionnaire, so coding to a certain event might trigger you to look at the follow-up questionnaire and to send that follow-up questionnaire to the reporter. You can also use SMQs in periodic reporting. So for example, medication errors are often a topic which needs to be discussed in periodic reports. So you could use the SMQ on medication errors or the SMQ of lack of efficacy in your periodic reports. Of course, if you have known safety topics or suspected safety issues which you need to discuss in your periodic report, if there is an SMQ, it makes a lot of sense to use the SMQ once you've reviewed that the in- and exclusion criteria are matching your safety question. So let's see whether you know what to consider when you're using an SMQ. I think this is one where you can just type in your answers. And maybe I need to click once to see answers coming in. Here. Consider the hierarchy. Yes. Read the guidance. This is something which I always mention several times. It's very important that you know what you're doing. check also the PTs which are included in the SMQ. That is very important. Decide which scope you need, whether you need the narrow search or the broad scope. But yes, I'm very happy that many of you want to read the guides and check the introductory guide to the SMQs first. Okay, read the guide, check the PTs. Oh yes, this is also a very interesting one. Is there already an SMQ? Yes, that is of course something which is important to check as your first step, especially when you're considering to investing a lot of effort into building your own query. It's very important to check whether you can reduce that effort by just using an SMQ. Also, I like check the version to be used. It should be aligned with your MedDRA version or the MedDRA version of your coded data. Coding and analyze safety signals. Yes, definitely. SMQs are used for analyzing these safety signals. Thanks a lot for your answers. Then I have one more. When requesting a broad scope SMQ, what do you include or expect as a search result? The broad terms only, the broad and narrow terms, broad terms and some narrow terms, a selection of broad and narrow terms, none of the above. And this time I give it a bit of time so that you are not biased by all the others who are responding. Okay, and let's see. Broad and narrow terms. Thanks a lot for listening, because that is the correct answer. The broad terms only is not advisable, and this is because this would mean you're not looking at the most specific terms. You're not looking at the terms which directly identify your topic of interest. So please, if you're doing a broad search, always include the narrow terms. The people who are saying a selection of broad and narrow terms or broad terms and some narrow terms, that is a topic which we will discuss later on. Usually, if you're doing a standardized MedDRA query, you need to do it exactly as it is defined. So you cannot use broad and narrow and some narrow terms or a selection of broad and narrow terms. In some instances, you might want to do that, but then you're not allowed to call it a standardized MedDRA query anymore. And this means you need to say it's a customized MedDRA query based on a standardized MedDRA query, or modified query based on a standardized MedDRA query. And this also means in your documentation, you need to really list all the PTs which you used. And if you still use a broad and narrow, you would also need to say these were narrow and these were broad PTs. So, or if you change the scope of some PTs, it's not a standardized MedDRA query anymore. It is a modified query based on a standardized MedDRA query. And please always remember to then document exactly your methodology. Okay, but I'm happy that most of you, when using a standardized MedDRA query, they said for the broad scope, we need the broad and the narrow search terms. Okay. Then now we have two examples of a scenario where an SMQ might be helpful. And the first scenario is your company started development of a new drug for onychomycosis, which they think it's taking 8 years. Usually it takes longer, and the costs are $1.2 billion. And here's well, first we have a nice picture. It's toenail fungus. For those who don't know the onychomycosis, the complicated word. And you are the safety physician and doing safety surveillance. So you decide to run the SMQs over your serious adverse events. And you do this periodically. You identify 5 possible cases of hemolytic anemia in your first 1,000 patients. And hemolytic anemia is a serious thing. Onychomycosis is a mild disease. So having 5 cases of hemolytic anemia in 1,000 patient exposures is a concern. And you, of course, before you communicate this concern, you, of course, look into the narratives, look at all the data which you have. But you come to the conclusion that this drug has an unfavorable risk-benefit ratio, and you suggest stopping the development of the project. And your management reviews this and follows your recommendation, and you save a lot of time, money, and of course, you're increasing the patient security because you don't put more patients at risk than necessary. So, job well done. Our second scenario is you're developing the fourth drug in a therapeutic class. The other products are associated with high blood pressure and angioedema, but they are for a very serious condition, and so this is an acceptable risk. And during the development and in the early post-marketing of your product, you routinely run the hypertension SMQ and the angioedema SMQ against your growing data set. And you find that it becomes clear that your drug is not associated with either hypertension or angioedema. And this means that patients can have a safer alternative for the treatment of their severe disease. And also here, congratulations. So the first one was the overall signal detection using SMQs over your data set without a predefined hypothesis. The second example was using a selection of SMQs because you had a known safety risk, which was based on a class effect. And that is how you can use SMQs. Any questions at this point, Leander?
No questions, thank you. We've got some interest in the customized searches, but I know you're coming on to that. Thank you.
It's my next. Okay, so the customized MedDRA searches, or you have several possibilities for customized searches. They can either be modified SMQs or ad hoc queries. So if you're thinking about modifying an SMQ, you should have a good reason to do that. It's making something which is standardized a non-standard query. So think about your reasons and also document your reasons, because usually it's better to use something as standard as possible. But there are sometimes good reasons to modify your the SMQs to make them fit your product, your project. And we will come to one which often is modified. Make sure that you clearly specify that this is a modified MedDRA query based on an SMQ. You can call it modified MedDRA query, you can call it customized MedDRA query. So there is no mandate how you call it, but you must make sure that it's not that it can be distinguished from a standardized MedDRA query. And you can use this to refer to a query which is based on an SMQ and which has been modified. The modifications need to be documented. And also remember, the version updates and the maintenance of a modified SMQ are not within the responsibility of the MSSO or the JMO. It will go into your organization to make sure that you version update and maintain that modified query if you want to reuse it. And one of the SMQs which is very frequently modified is, for example, the SMQ lack of efficacy effect, because it can be made more product specific. And maybe let's look at the SMQ shortly. So let's go back to the browser, close this here, and open the lack of efficacy. And you see a lot of terms which are very specific. For example, vaccination failure. If you now have a hypertension drug, vaccination failure might not be of interest for you. You can also see other terms which maybe are not interesting for your like a diet failure or a device failure. If you're talking about a drug, all these device terms might not be interesting. Often they don't cause much trouble because they are often not coded in your data set. So before excluding terms from the lack of efficacy SMQ, I would suggest that you just use it as it is. And just if you see that it retrieves a lot of cases which are not relevant, then you could consider modifications. But there are also things which are sometimes missing. For example, if you consider intrauterine devices, and then you might consider other terms to be added, like pregnancy on contraceptive device, for example, is a MedDRA term which might be missing for the lack of efficacy effect of such a particular drug. So these are considerations which you can have depending on your product or project. So let's go back. If you want, or maybe any more questions on the modifications on SMQs?
No, not at this time. Thank you, Anne.
Okay. Then we have other customized searches, which are often called ad hoc queries. And these you consider when there is no SMQ which you can use. And for setting up ad hoc queries, you need medical knowledge. You need to look into the topic of interest. And we discussed this more in the previous webinar. You need a clear definition of the condition. You need to read up on it if you're not already an expert. So you should be knowledgeable of all relevant signs and symptoms, which lab values might be needed. Are there medical procedures which I would need to consider? Remember, and now we're coming to the next point, you need to have knowledge of the structure and characteristics of MedDRA. So there are these uniaxial SOCs, the investigations, the medical and surgical procedures, and the social circumstances, where you also might find terms which are interesting for your safety topic. But you need always to consider that there are these extra SOCs which might be where you can find terms which might be needed for your search. You should also, of course, know your data, and we discussed this in more detail. But if your data was transformed from legacy data and the other terminology had less granularity than MedDRA, just searching for very specific granular terms might not be the best approach. We discussed this also shortly with the lactic acidosis. If your legacy data just included the term acidosis for any type of acidosis, then you would need to include more terms into your search to be able to retrieve those cases. So the MedDRA data retrieval and presentation points to consider document has a lot of query construction tips. Refer to these and think about these. And very importantly, it's also possible to save a query for future use. But for this, it's good if you document your thinking, if you document the inclusion criteria, the exclusion criteria, if you define the medical concept clearly, so that somebody who's looking at your query understands how you build it and how broad, how narrow, what were your considerations when looking for terms to be included or also for terms to be excluded. Maybe you even did some testing and found that a certain PT was not useful in the query because it retrieved too many irrelevant cases. And maybe document that for the next person who's interested in the same safety topic, that PT might be a perfect fit. Then remember that you need to maintain your query with every MedDRA version, so that the MedDRA version of your query matches the MedDRA version of your search. And what we usually do at the MSSO, we look at all the new PTs, we look at changes to PTs, promotions, demotions, and then we decide what needs to be changed in a query. And then as a last point, if it's a relevant safety topic, and you could also consider submitting your ad hoc query to the MSSO via a change request for possible development as an SMQ. SMQ change requests are a bit more complicated than other change requests because we ask users to submit a whole range of answers to 5 questions. So a question is, and we can have a look at that, because you can submit a change request through the change request tool, the WebCR tool. Also here, it depends a bit on your credentials, whether you can directly do it to the English MedDRA version. If not, then you might have other people in your company who would do it for you. But if you want to submit an SMQ change request, so add a new SMQ, you see here that there are important questions. So what is the scientific pharmacovigilance question that led to the request for this SMQ? What is the regulatory need for this SMQ? Would this SMQ be applicable to more than one product or therapeutic area? And importantly, why is the current MedDRA hierarchy or any existing SMQ not suitable to address the question? And also, we're asking for your current practice for addressing the question and to provide us your strategy and the terms included in the search. So always a possibility, but put a bit more thinking into it than for any other term change requests. And before summarizing, Leander, is there any question?
No questions at the moment. Thank you, Anne.
Okay. Then we reviewed the MedDRA data retrieval and presentation points to consider document. We discussed the characteristics, the uses, applications, and also benefits of standardized MedDRA queries, and had a short discussion on customization as well as building ad hoc queries. And with this, I'm kind of at the end of the presentation. We added some further information on where you can find more information. So our MedDRA.org website, the email to our help desk where you can address any questions to our colleagues. Then we have a frequently asked questions page. Here are also the links to the MedDRA browsers, the link to the change request tool. And if we don't have any further questions at the moment, then we could just jump to the training schedule, which is also on our MedDRA.org website under training. And you can see here there are our face-to-face classes. We usually have one-day classes for coding with MedDRA, and also a full-day class on safety data analysis and SMQs. So these are in Argentina, Brazil. There's both classes coming up in China. We have 2 sets of classes in India, 1 set of classes in South Korea, and 2 sets of classes coming this year in the US. So lots of possibilities. Maybe, Leander, you know more about when the next classes will be, the next face-to-face classes come up in Europe. But we also have then a full schedule of interesting webinars, which you can find here.
Thank you, Anne. We don't currently have any planned for Europe for the rest of this year, face-to-face classes. But if anyone would like to host face-to-face classes, then you can email the help desk at mssohelp@meddra.org. And Anne's just showing, we've just recently posted our November schedule for webinars. So they've only just gone on in the last day or so.
Okay. As a summary, just open it at intervals to see whether something interesting is coming up for you in your language, at your time of interest. And we are always updating regularly, adding new classes, new webinars to this page. Okay. Then with
Thank
that,
you, Annie. Well, whilst you're there, would you mind just showing where the YouTube channel is, in case
yeah, sure.
anyone wants to look back at some of our pre-recorded webinars, for those that might have missed last week's data analysis as well that was there. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a lot of things in our training button here. We have course descriptions where you can find out what a course is about. We have the training materials which you can download, and we have instructional videos. And here you can stream a lot of videos on how to get started. These are quite short ones. And we have the introductions to MedDRA, we have coding, and so on. And then the link is on the contacts page, right? Here. So we have up here the contacts page, where you also find our help desk email, but then also our social media representation. And if you click here on YouTube, you will be taken to, sorry for that, to our YouTube channel. And you can see here all our trainers, several playlists. It usually includes also the language the trainers are providing their presentations in. And sometimes it's also good to just look at a topic from several trainers, because we all have a different style. You might like the voice of one person better than that of the other person, or maybe somebody explains it in a way which is more easy for you to understand than another person. So these are all available on YouTube and easy to navigate and to search. Any other questions, Leander? I just have my question answer.
That was really helpful. It's really helpful to show the YouTube channel. I appreciate that. And I've just put in the link in the chat to our MedDRA learning management system as well. So if anyone is interested in doing some of the online classes, you can access that and create your own account through our MedDRA learning management system, LMS.
Thank you. That is very helpful. And maybe to add, the YouTube channel, of course, is a very helpful thing, because you can rewatch, you can watch from different trainers, but you don't get a certificate. In the webinars, you get a certificate, but also in our learning management system, we have some certificate courses. And if you need a certificate, the learning management system is a good place to also do your MedDRA training in the LMS.
Thank you, Annie. There's no other questions at this time. So yeah,
Great.
I think we've answered everything. Thank you.
And thank you, Leander, for helping to facilitate this meeting and for watching out for the questions. And thank you to everybody for joining this webinar and for participating and listening. And I will just wish you a nice rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.